Those were not pajama bottoms. And I'm a professional. It's a professional. Professional. Let's talk about the rollout. Let's talk about how you manage player. We've spent so much time focusing on Composer and on building interactive experiences that we tend to give a little short shrift to how important it is to manage your player deployment. These are the pieces of software running your experiences in the field. We need to make sure you can manage that as well. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes discussing what it takes to have a mature, robust, and dependable player deployment to handle your experiences. We're going to start by looking at player activation. Player activation is the act of associating a player with an Intuiface account and optionally assigning a license. When you install Player, you're going to see a screen like this when you run it. After you install it, you run Player, you're going to see this screen. We have a whole bunch of different ways of activating Player. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see email address or license key, sort of the old-fashioned means of licensing a player, of activating it, associating it with an Intuiface account. The problem with that approach is it does require a keyboard, and depending on the deployment, you may not have access to a keyboard. It may be inaccessible. Good news, there are other methods for activating Player. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see an 8-digit code. There's a page on our website for single player activation. This web page on the My Intuiface website, under Manage, see Single Player Activation. If you go to that page and enter the 8-digit code presented by Player, it will automatically activate that player, sending you to this screen. See this screen? When you type in the 8-digit code onto the Single Player Activation page, it sends you this screen. That code is unique to that instance of Player on that device. The license server is saying, got it, I understand what device you're talking about. Now, do you want me to assign a license automatically? Do you want to choose a specific license? Or don't license it, treat it as a free player, just assign it to my Intuiface account. Even better, you can at this point specify a nickname that will show up in the Share and Deploy console, tags, which are really important for deployment, we'll get to that. Maybe you want some notes to give you a little more flavor about which player we're talking about. Finally, toggling whether or not you want to enable that player to collect data for analytics. Maybe you're not going to do it, but at least enabling it to have the option, and then click activating the license. Once you do that, it's done. Now what's interesting is if player is online, if that device is connected to the network, then by clicking activate license, you automatically connect that particular player to the license server. You're done. In fact, that player could be on an offline device. When you go through this process, the license server can't see player. Player's offline, but that's okay. It's going to wait for it to come online. So you don't have to be online to go through this process. It's going to work even if offline. So what's that QR code? So the QR code is a shortcut. If I take my phone and scan that QR code, what it's doing is it's taking the 8-digit code and filling out the form for you. You're basically sent directly to this screen. It's a shortcut, and even better, you're on your phone. You could be, I don't know, in some environment where there's absolutely no keyboard. There's no way to directly access the device running player. Just scan the QR code on your phone, fill out the form, you've activated that player. Pretty simple, right? So there's lots of different ways to activate player. Here's one more way. What if you have lots of player devices? I mean, it could be 2, could be 102, could be 1,002. This is a long process doing player by player by player. So the good news is there's another approach to activating players, which is a batch activation approach. With batch activation, what you're doing is you're creating a text file with a list of each individual player, some unique identifier, and usually it's the MAC address of the device, but there are other options depending on the platform, and then the tags and the description and data point processing, all the usual stuff. The beauty of this approach is, number one, the devices don't have to be online. Number two, the devices don't even have to really be plugged in yet. They can be off. And you can list as many devices as you want and then upload the CSV file. You see upload your CSV? By uploading the CSV file, Intuiface's license server will automatically identify all of the players in your list and activate them one by one, so you don't have to fill out the form over and over again. You could do one device at a time, but normally batch activation is for a list. Here's just an example of what that would look like. This is in our Help Center. This is in the batch activation article. Notice the first row of the comma-separated value file are basically the property names, hardware ID, that unique identifier, device nickname, player tags, notes, data point processing, and then each row is another player. You don't have to take this approach. You can do it one at a time. You can log in like you always have. But if you have lots of players, you want to make life easier for you, this batch activation approach is a really cool one. So looking at my notes, we're going on now to, let's assume we've activated player. What's my next step? I'm going to spend some time on the My Intuiface website. Everybody with an Intuiface account has access to this website. When you publish experiences from Composer, when you select File, Publish in Composer, what you're doing is putting a copy of that experience into the cloud. By default, under the covers, that's Intuiface Cloud Storage, which is really Amazon S3, but we call it Intuiface Cloud Storage. If you go to the My Intuiface website, when you publish an experience, it's on the My Experiences page. That's where it is. So these are either my experiences that have been published or technically shared with me. If you look on the right, you see shared with me. That means somebody else, some other account published an experience and they shared it with me. This is where my published experiences go. You can only remotely deploy experiences if you're working with a published experience. You got to publish first. Let's jump over to the players view, My Players. That's under the Manage menu. You can see My Players at the top there. Let's talk about players. What we're about to discuss, anybody can do. Remote deployment, which we'll talk about, you have to have an enterprise level Composer plan, but publishing experiences, everybody. Managing your players, everybody. Activating your players, everybody. Here are my players. Now, if you look on the right, you can select by platform. On the lower right, select by status. Notice if I select offline, I see other players. So I have more players than the 5 that you see. It's just that those 5 are the only ones that are currently offline for whatever reason. So certainly when they're offline, there's no screenshot. But notice for the players that are online, that's a live screenshot. It's refreshed every few seconds, so it's not a snapshot once an hour. It's every few seconds, so you know exactly what's happening on that screen at a given point in time. There's some icons associated with these players. Notice, for example, in the upper left of each player, there's a little symbol indicating the operating system. So we have 3 players running on Windows PCs. We have 2 players running on Android devices. There's other icons here, for example, whether data point processing is activated and whether any jobs are scheduled. Jobs are things you want to have happen to player in the future. So these are things that are scheduled. They could technically be in process, but normally it's about scheduled jobs. Let's dive in. Let's take a look. We'll do Menu Board Chicago, which is an Android device. Notice there's some information about this player device. What is the name of the device? What version of Android, that sort of thing. You can see the license key assigned to that device. Here's the notes field we talked about when activating player. You could put things in there. And then here's the tags field. Now it could be blank, but you're going to want to use tags. Tags are critical for remote deployment because that is the key tool for identifying the set of players you want to deploy to. In this case, we're saying this particular player is tagged Chicago, USA, QSR, menu board, because we think these are the tags most appropriate for identifying this particular player in a various set of filter criteria. Maybe I want all players in Chicago, maybe I want all players in the USA, maybe I want all players that are dedicated to running menu boards. See what I'm saying? So there might be more than one way to slice and dice my players. Tagging is the means by which I can differentiate one player from the other. You can have any number of tags that you want. Every player can have a different number of tags. I mean, you can do whatever you want. But give it a lot of thought, because if you're doing remote deployment, you're going to absolutely, positively use those tags. Scrolling farther down, you see a set of tabs differentiating pieces of information or activity that I can perform with an individual player. For example, player status notification. This actually applies to player on any supported platform. If player's online, offline status changes, you do have the option to be notified. You can put any email address you want. So if you're a little worried that player might go offline, you turn this on, you'll get an email every time that happens. Player launch preference. This applies to any platform as well. When player is launched, what do you want to have happen? Do you want it to run the last opened experience or display the experiences panel? That's pretty cool. So you can go directly into the experience, which normally you would do in a location that's in the store, it's in the museum. You don't want to show the experiences panel. But if it's maybe on a test device, in the office, maybe you want to go to the experiences panel, so you can make that choice. Depending on the platform, there could be other preferences that you can configure. For Android, for example, you can choose what happens when an experience is exited. Okay? In other words, if you explicitly put an exit option in your experience, which you don't have to do, but if you put an exit option in your experience, do you want it to return to the experiences panel or close player? So there could be a variety of options there under the preferences menu. Data points is about whether or not you want to download data points on that device. The event log is a list of all of the events that occurred on that device. So notice, for example, that a job was sent to player. That job skipped pushing an experience because the latest version was already on that device. So it played that experience and the job ended. These 4 events collectively represent the push of an experience to a device and playing it. In this case, the push didn't have to happen because the latest version was there, and then it played it. The main reason to use events is for troubleshooting. So if there is a problem, you could take a look and see if maybe there's an indication of the problem. You can also share it with the support team, and we can troubleshoot it together. The Jobs tab, as I said, these are about things typically that I've scheduled to do, like remote deployment, and we'll look at that. There are a couple of other things you can schedule as well. Certainly if jobs are in progress, you'll see them here as well, but mainly this is about scheduled jobs, and you might have multiple jobs that are scheduled. And finally, there is a Deploy tab. In this case, I've picked the player, and then I pick the experience. I'm going to reverse that because I think that might be more, well, I'm not going to reverse it, but I want to take one more step before we pick an experience, and I'll show you what that looks like, which is this. Let me go back to the big picture view of my experiences. It's very likely that when I'm doing deployment, I'm going to deploy to multiple devices running player, not one single device. Let's, for example, look at the 2 menu board players here. You see those on the right? Menu board Chicago, menu board Toulouse. I want to deploy an experience to those 2 players. I don't want to deploy to the others. No, I might have 100 players or 1,000 players. So here I could do click, click. I've selected 2, not too hard. But if there's hundreds, that would be a real pain in the butt. Let me somehow filter this. Let me, on the upper right, see search by tags. I could put menu board. It remembers that tag. So I do menu board. And thanks to the tags, it has filtered down my list of players to these 2 because they're the only 2 players with the tag menu board, which is what I want. So we will, on the left side, I've selected both devices. See, I've selected both of them. Then on the right, all selected devices. By clicking that, I'm saying whatever I do next, I want to do for all of these devices. Here it's 2 devices. It could be 100 devices. If I scroll down, there's the very familiar tabs. You know about those. Deploy tab. Here I get to pick the experience I wish to deploy. Now remember, the screenshot was the menu board. See this guy, right, with the spoon and that kind of thing? Let's deploy something very different. The sales presentation. I want to deploy the sales presentation. So I select the sales presentation, then at the bottom you see the deploy button. I can push, which means I can only push, right? I can only push, see that at the bottom, which means put the latest version of that experience on the player, but don't play it. I can just play, which means play the version of the experience already on the device. Even if there's a newer one that's published, ignore that. Just play what's on the device, or push and play. Take the latest, put it on the device, then play it. So we'll do push and play. We're essentially replacing the menu board experience with the sales presentation experience, and deploy. So we're now deploying, and we have a job ongoing. You can see push, then play sales presentation. That job is ongoing for 2 players. Let me jump out to the list of players, and you can see the deployment has already finished. See the screenshots of these 2 players? It's no longer that spoon from the menu board. It's the sales presentation. Further proof, you can see the name of the experience below the name of the player. So that's pretty simple, right? These players could be anywhere in the world. Now, I wasn't wearing pajama bottoms, but if I was, it wouldn't matter, because I could be in my home in my pajama bottoms deploying experiences to players anywhere in the world. Piece of cake. Let's talk a little bit about scheduling. If I go back to players here, check out these players. Now, these players are both so like this is Windows. Let's go to some Windows players because it's more interesting. So I'm going to get rid of my tag filter, and let's only show, using the filter on the right, only the devices on Windows. We'll select all of those and go to all selected players. Notice restart, reboot, change version. Not only can I do it, they have little calendars. Restart means remotely restart player. Reboot means remotely restart the Windows PC. Change version literally means change the version of player, and they all have calendar. That means they can be scheduled. Okay? I'm going to give you that example with deployment as well. Under deployment, notice you pick an experience. Then on the bottom, deploy also has the calendar experience. If I click deploy, that means now. If I click restart, that means now. Reboot means now. If I click the calendar, it means no. I want to schedule this. I want it to happen once, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. You can choose. So maybe daily, so every how many days, at what time, starting on what day, so I can schedule all of these things in advance. It could be rebooting the machine every night, just to kind of clean the plate and get ready for the next day. It could be deploying an experience that is ready now, but it's not going live till Tuesday. So you're scheduling a one-time push for Tuesday because that's when you want the new experience to go up. You can schedule all these things in advance. You have total control over when you want to do this. You can have multiple jobs scheduled at the same time. And this even applies to offline devices. Even if the players or some of the players you want to deploy to or reboot or whatever are offline, Intuiface is smart enough to say, look, I know you scheduled a job for this player. I don't see it right now, so I'm going to wait for it. But when it is online, I'm going to do whatever it is that you scheduled. So it's really smart about that. It takes care of a lot of the details for you. So that is remote deployment. Remember, you do need a Composer Enterprise plan in order to do that. Anybody can see the players that they have associated with their Intuiface account. All their activated players, you can see that. Let me touch on one other topic, which is an API that we created to facilitate remote deployment. We recognize that although I think we've built a pretty good user interface here to manage remote deployment, to help you pick players and deploy to them and monitor jobs and look at the events. Some of you might prefer to create your own user interface to somehow manage it yourself. Well, we've actually created a web API for it. So under Manage, see Intuiface API Guide. You see that? If I go here, there are 2 sets of APIs that exist for Intuiface right now. They're both web APIs. One is for web triggers, which we'll talk about in another session. The other is the Share and Deploy API. Now, I have to admit that some of you are probably not familiar with writing web APIs, and so this might be a little Greek to you. But the idea here is that everything we just discussed, finding particular experiences, filtering players, scheduling remote deployment, all of these things can be programmatically achieved using a web API. You don't have to use our user interface. You can create your own. Thus, you're creating a branded user interface to the capabilities we provide for you to manage your experience deployment. So there's a lot here. My advice to you is to give us a lot of attention and thought to how you manage your players, to ensure they're sensibly tagged, to make sure that all of the players are activated with the right sets of licenses, and to get comfortable with remote deployment, because when you get good at it, you're going to do it all the time. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to stick around for this Q&A, so I'm going to join Geoff. I'll see you there.